We're very pleased today to have Dr. Robert Watson with us, who is a commentator, a professor at Lynn University. Lynn, as you know, is holds the third debate in the presidential election, where he'll have on campus President Barack Obama and the challenger, Governor Romney. Whenever I talk about Governor Romney and Obama, I want to like the Thriller in Manila, but Lynn's has a very dynamic president and university, and is located right in Boca Raton. Dr. Watson has been a guest on BBC and also the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and Inside Politics, and then a special report with Brit Hume, one of my favorite. And Dr. Watson, welcome to the show.
Pleasure, Dr. Davenport. Always a pleasure. Good to see you again after so many years.
Well, thank you. You know, you also did a very interesting report on the accomplishments of President Obama. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that all came about?
Sure. Well, you know, when a president hits their 100-day mark, rightly or wrongly, the press, scholars, pundits, we all use that first 100 days as an early report card. Ever since FDR, that's kind of been the standard or the measure to see if a president's come out of the gates strong or weak. So I was asked by a few media outlets, and I give a lot of public speeches, I organize a lot of public town halls. I was asked by several groups and several media outlets to make remarks on Obama's 100th day. So around day 80, I started compiling a list of what he had done in his first 100 days. And quite frankly, I was shocked. I couldn't believe the extensiveness of it, to the point where, and most of my books, most of my work is on the history of the American presidency. I was willing to say that next to FDR and next to LBJ, that no president had such a long list of accomplishments in 100 days. So I decided I would simply just track the president's list. So it grew and it grew, and I started itemizing it. I would make a list of accomplishments and initiatives, whether you support them or not, on the environment, on energy, on budget issues. And then, of course, there's a lot of controversy surrounding his presidency. You know, you either love him or you hate him kind of a view. So I put a list together of what I thought were all his accomplishments. I put a list together of what I thought were all of his mistakes. There's been a lot of questions whether Obama has been a friend of Israel. So I made a list of all the initiatives or all the loan guarantees, aid packages, trade agreements, immigration exchanges that he's done for Israel. So I seem to have turned into the list guy. I'm Dr. List. So, and I've just kind of kept up with the list, and what it's turned out to be is that I think there's a huge disconnect in that there's this perception that Obama's done nothing. And that comes from Democrats and Republicans. It comes from the press, where it's clear that this has been one of the most activist presidencies in American history. Now, he's made mistakes. He's done some things right, whether you agree with him or disagree with him. But it's a remarkably long list of accomplishments. And to that point, it's undeniable. Now, I leave it to the readers and to the public and to the, the voters in a couple of days to decide whether that list is a good or bad list.
I found the list on the internet, but where can the viewers view that list themselves?
There's a website I worked on called The Rational Majority. It's therationalmajority.org. And what it started out as is a couple of friends and I, there was just such scathing attacks on Obama that we figured we'd fact check them. For example, even tongue-in-cheek things. For instance, I got a series of emails and phone calls by people saying that Obama doesn't allow a Christmas tree in the White House. He wants to cancel Christmas and no Christmas trees. So I got a bunch of photographs off the AP and off of standard media services of the Obama family standing around with guests in front of the Christmas trees in the White House. So I put them on the website and said that Christmas has not yet been canceled. And then there was a whole series of sort of misinformation that Obama had canceled the National Day of Prayer. So I posted his proclamation on the National Day of Prayer and recognizing it as the National Day of Prayer, as George W. Bush, as Bill Clinton, as Ronald Reagan, as all presidents have done. So it started kind of tongue-in-cheek, and then it grew out from there into taking a look at whether Obama kept promises that he made during the campaign. And of course, some of those promises were kept and some of those were not kept. So I listed all that as well.
Well, I think one of the things that people have to realize that when you work for a president, that personnel, and I keep trying to tell people that personnel is policy. And I think that if I could assess President Obama's administration, I think his biggest problem, he didn't recognize that. He is the only one that can go on television and really sell his programs. He has, well, you have Secretary Duncan and you have the Secretary of HHS, but once you get beyond that, because Secretary Clinton is really not involved in domestic politics. I'm talking about those who can sell the domestic policy. And when you listen to the other cabinet secretaries, they don't make a good presentation.
Right.
So you have Duncan and you have HHS, and that doesn't give a president enough people to sell his program, because I don't think that if you agree with what he's doing, I'm not saying I agree with what he's doing, but when you look at what he's doing, I think you're right. He has been the most activist president. I say since Roosevelt, you say since Johnson, because you're counting in the Great Society in there with all those changes there. But I would if whoever wins, if it's Romney or if it's Obama, I hope they understand what Reagan did and Ed Meese and Mike Deaver did, that the personnel is policy, and you've got to get people in your cabinet, and not just to say I have this person and be politically correct there and here, but people who are going to be able to sell your program.
Right.
And they fail to do that, and so a lot of times when people go out, I see a lot of in various campaigns, I see a lot of old people my age out there in the middle of these demonstrations saying, "Get government out of my health care."
Right.
And
get them out of
we're all involved in the largest government insurance program in the country is Medicare. So that they don't understand there's a disconnect between that program and their program. When people talk about other insurance programs or whatever, and I'm not saying that Obamacare is the right approach, or not, but I think it's something that people ought to at least be intelligent when they're debating it.
No, I think you're spot on. I think you're right on the money, and that is, I think Obama's been poorly served by a lot of his staffers. Now, you mentioned Arne Duncan, the education secretary. I think he's articulate, an accomplished man, but you can use surrogates to sell your message, but there's no substitute for the big guy. It has to come from the president, and I think one of the big criticisms of the Obama administration, whether you support him or don't support him, is that they've done a really poor job of marketing their accomplishments. You don't even hear this president talking about ending the war in Iraq, which would be, if George W. Bush had ended the war in Iraq, he would be standing on an aircraft carrier, in a flight suit telling us about it.
He did that.
Which he did, right there. I was setting you up. I'm giving you the low-hanging fruit, Dr. Davenport. But I'll be your straight man for the rest of the show. But Obama didn't even do that. During the last debate, I mean, my goodness, he should say General Motors is hiring. Bin Laden's dead. We're doing stem cell research. Our soldiers are out of Iraq. He doesn't market his accomplishments very well. His staff has done a poor job. Timothy Geithner, for example, Treasury Secretary, I think everyone would agree that Geithner is a bright man and is considered to be an impressive mind financially, but he has done a horrendous job of articulating what the president has been trying to do. Most people believe that the auto rescue was some kind of unnecessary handout, and he's just done a really poor job at it. And there's this sort of two sides of this. I think Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton did it right, and that is this notion of a perpetual campaign. I think Bush 1 and Obama have done a poor job of it, and that is, there's campaign mode, there's governing mode. For example, Bush 1, when he was elected, he just utterly stopped campaigning and went straight into governing mode. But if you don't keep your approval numbers high, and if you don't keep reminding the public, it undercuts your ability to govern. Mm-hmm. Obama, the same way, he basically stopped campaigning and went right into governing mode. It undercut it. Bush 2, I think, was the opposite end. He never stopped campaigning, and I don't think he really ever governed. I mean, he didn't do enough about 100 domestic issues. But I think Reagan and I think Bill Clinton got it right. They never stopped campaigning. They maintained that almost magical rapport both of them had with the American public. They kept their approval high. Both of them could explain things in a way that the public could get. And both Reagan and Clinton were the best salesmen for their own messages. But yet at the same time, both of them made an easy transition to governing without abandoning the public opinion aspect of it. So I think Obama, who's a student of history, really has had a short read there. He should have done, and we learned during the campaign that Obama was spending a lot of time looking at Reagan, but apparently not enough.
Well, I think he was reading the wrong books. He had the cliff notes, not the real book, because when you begin to look at it, who you pick as your cabinet secretaries. When Reagan was picking their cabinet secretary, and there was a lot of discussion on the cabinet secretaries, the deputies, and assistant secretaries. Everyone was being picked for how they could help promote, market the president's program and how much they believed in the president. I think President Obama got off target. His people did. For example, not saying that how good of an administrator the guy would have been, but if I was picking his chief of staff, I would have picked a true believer. And that would have been the David who ran the campaign, who was the campaign guy and did all the polling and statistics, so that because where his loyalty lies, and you want somebody whose whole commitment is to you. And the reason why people have today, we have a Reagan Revolution, we have a Reagan Society, that's an organization that was formed to keep a group of Reaganites in order to keep connected. There's not going to be an Obama Society. There's not going to be a Bill Clinton group. There's not a Young Americans for Freedom, which bought the Reagan Ranch out there in California to keep the conservative philosophy going. But when you begin to look at a Bill Clinton, who's a master salesperson, and the other day he was in Las Vegas and he did a Rush, and that's for Rush Limbaugh, because you remember in one of the shows, and I'm waiting to see how the liberal media handles that, because Rush at one of the presentations that he did in Washington D.C., he did sort of a jump up and down. And and MSNBC always plays that. And I'm wondering if they're going to show Bill Clinton every hour on the hour jumping up and down, because Bill jumped off the ground to make his point. He's a very personal person. You feel a connection, like you did with Ronald Reagan, if you agree with Bill Clinton or not. And so that, being the cool guy, that Obama's image that he wants to sell is not how you connect with the American people, unless the guy that you're running against is more disliked, But unfortunately, right now, I think they have to have him out. And fortunately for them, they now have the First Lady, Michelle Obama, out, who's a very articulate spokesperson.
She sure is, and her approval numbers are higher than her husband's, which is the case.
And so you have that, and then to counter that, Governor Romney is using Ann Romney out. Mm-hmm. And full disclosure, I lived in Michigan when his dad was the governor, and his dad was one of the nicest guys that you would ever meet in your life.
You'll get no argument from me on that. I think his father was a great public servant. Yes.
And it was too bad that people misunderstood, in my opinion, his statement about being brainwashed in Vietnam. Because I understood what he was talking about. He was talking about that the marketing effort, the propaganda, as we want to talk, is very convincing, and he bought it. But when he looked at it, it wasn't what he believed. But he would have been
articulate his position very well.
Yeah, you know what I mean. As you go through that, and it was on a small channel that he did that.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched the point there. I think I've said for a year now that the Romney campaign has made a huge mistake by not putting Ann Romney out in front of the public. For many reasons, Romney is not a real likable guy, much like I think Kerry, much like I think Bush won, much like I think Al Gore. Unlike, let's say, a Reagan or a Clinton, who had that rapport with people. But by bringing the First Lady out, who better to tell your narrative? He was born in a log cabin. He was a good husband, a good father. And the First Lady can do that better than anyone. Moreover, First Ladies or prospective First Ladies, spouses' approval numbers are typically higher than their husbands. At the same time, the press is not going to expect the spouse to answer questions about what do we do in Libya or Syria. So she kind of gets a pass and gets a softball approach to just talking about her husband in a personal way. And in these elections, and you've alluded to this, character is king. Personality trumps policy. And you've got to have that likability. You've got to have that rapport, that connection. So I think the Romney people for a year have missed the opportunity have Ann Romney get out and be an effective surrogate and tell her husband's story. And Michelle Obama is very effective at that. And I think Obama is starting to loosen up a little bit. And it, I think he should have done it months before, though, about telling his narrative. Ditto with Mitt Romney. I would have to, Dr. Davenport, respectfully disagree about the Bill Clinton Limbaugh analogy. I do think it'll be interesting to watch how the media covers Bill Clinton jumping up and down. I do think the difference, however, is Rush Limbaugh, since the first day he appeared in the media, has said nothing but irresponsible, hateful. He cherry picks the facts. He stirs up the pot of discontent. He's a divisive guy. Whereas all of us would agree that Bill Clinton, whether it was welfare reform, where he reached out and worked very effectively with Republicans in Congress, NAFTA, where he worked effectively with Republicans in Congress, deficit reduction, where he partnered up with Republicans in Congress, his One America, where he engaged in national dialogue on race relations and conversation on the topic. Bill Clinton's entire career has been about reaching out, about seeking common ground. When people wanted to end affirmative action or continue it, he chose to compromise and don't ask, don't tell with mm-hmm. gays in the military, mend it, don't end it with affirmative action. So I do think if the media gives Clinton a pass, I don't know that that's necessarily that they're being liberally biased, because this is a president who throughout his career, I think, has been remarkably, much like Bush 1, I think, has been a remarkably, centrist, restrained public servant, unlike Limbaugh, who is just, he's father's Charles Coughlin. He's a divisive guy who makes his money off of division.
Well,
I would have to respectfully disagree on that.
Dr. Watson, on Rush has his point of view, and so when you listen to Rush's show, his point of view, and so and that's one of the things I love about America is everybody can have their point of view, and we can argue about that. Where I disagree with people is that facts are facts, and when polls are up, I listen to these presidential candidates talk about, the polls don't mean anything. Yeah. When the polls show them ahead, they're out there quoting the polls. Well, if they didn't mean anything when you're behind, they don't mean anything when you're ahead.
Well, there's that great line by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He used to say, "Sir, you're entitled to your opinions, but not to your facts." And of course, LBJ was the master of what you talked about. LBJ would always carry a poll inside his jacket. He would allegedly pull this out and say, "The polls show that you should agree with me," and then put it back in his jacket. You and I could find a poll to prove that the earth is flat, for crying out loud. But there's political spin is one thing. And I take your point there that we cannot allow politicians to just get away with just shameless spin, or reinventing the facts. What was old Mark Twain's line about there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics, right? So we do need to hold their feet to the fire with that. But I do think that, and Limbaugh, I would fight for his right to go on the airwaves, as I would with Randy Rhodes on the left, or Oberman, or Hannity. I personally have no interest in any of those folks. I don't like the hard left or the hard right. It's always a little too divisive for me, but they sure do have the right to hit those airwaves. I just wish we could find more centrists that could get some traction and resonate with the public. But but I do think, though, that when, whether it's a show like this, you're a man who's had public positions, you've worked in White House, you've been a senior administrator at universities. I do think when I do media commentary, I'm in front of students as a professor, I do think with that comes a responsibility. We're all free to, we're all quick to remind everyone that we have lots of freedoms, which is one of the things that makes America great. We have the freedom to do whatever we want. We have all these liberties. I have the freedom of speech. I have the freedom of this. But for every freedom and right that we have, we also have a responsibility to exercise that with judiciousness in a way that's civil and constructive for the public. Sure, we have the right to be dumb, or right to be idiotic, or right to be, to misbehave. But largely, we have a responsibility. And I think that too many politicians forget that they work for us, that they are our employees, that they hold the most sacred, fiduciary, this high moral responsibility, which is public office. I think folks on the airwaves forget, on both sides of the aisle, forget that they have a responsibility to maybe tone down some of the rhetoric, to tone down the divisiveness. A lot of them are partially responsible for this horrible incivility, I think, that's gripping the American body politic today. I have certain views that I sure don't share in the classroom. Because I have a hat that I put on that's a professor's hat, and I have a hat that says the Watson's hat. I have certain views that I don't share on the radio or television or in a program like this because that might be my private view, but then now I have my public hat on. But whenever I'm in public or speaking, I try to never be angry or ugly. I try to always be a little comical, light. I try to find common ground. I try to show respect for anyone I'm talking with. Unfortunately, whether it's Oberman or Randy Rhodes on the left, or whether it's Beck or Limbaugh on the right, some folks simply don't recognize that high responsibility that we all have to move our great experiment in popular government forward and not try to tear the darn thing apart.
Well, the thing that I keep saying is that I want my politicians, and I like to see everybody else talk about what it is to be an American, and that their first vote should always be what's best for America, and not for their party. As
Sure,
I keep telling people keep talking about Ronald Reagan this and Ronald Reagan that, and they quote him, but they don't want to be like Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan always said that if you do the right things for the country, it'll work out right for you and for your party. And people haven't done that, because if we really looked at the other day, with so many people unemployed and the figures went below 8%, you saw people running out saying these workers at the U.S. Department of Labor and the Statistics Department had jiggled the figures.
Yeah, right.
That's irresponsible,
Sure
because they don't. They have to sign almost every day a confidentiality thing that they're not going to do with the figures. They don't release them. The president gets them, if I recall, memory serves me right, one day before the release. They're shared with the White House. And that's kind of irresponsible thinking, a conspiracy, trying to make a conspiracy. And those were not large drops. What they should be talking about is we're at 7.8. And our plan will take it down to 5.8 or 4.8. This is what we're going to be offering for the America. Or that we're going to be starting a program to really rebuild manufacturing in America. And as, for example, the things that the president has done in his administration, because presidents get blamed, they get too much blame when they shouldn't get it, and they get too much credit when they shouldn't. But we begin to look at, there's more oil being produced in America today than it has in modern history. So our drawdown, or what I call importing oil, is, in fact, we're shipping oil out. Yeah. And if we've discovered oil in Ohio or in North Dakota and all these other places, it's going to be plus along with our natural gas. Mm-hmm. Now keep in mind, a lot is done on state land. Where I fought the White House on is that they haven't really looked into the EPA and Department of Commerce and Interior and see how they can play their role to increase that. We have to quit making political decisions on where we drill. It has to be if it's safe, and if we can produce it without affecting our environment and our water. And we all got to realize that we have to have regulations. What we do not want to go say, maybe some regulations are too tough, or it may not be enough. But we, at the same time, maybe we need to loosen some up. But you got to have regulations to tell people the rules of how to play the game. You don't want people out there deciding for themselves what food they're going to protect, or what drugs are going to be on the market. You don't want that.
Well, no, clearly, and I think that, on the one hand, just drill, baby, drill. That's not going to solve our energy problems, and it's not good for anyone except a couple of oil company investors. On the other hand, not allowing additional energy exploration or additional oil exploration or more refining or alternative energy, that's not going to work either. Very rarely is there a simple answer and a quick answer to a complicated problem. We need to continue to drill. We need to look for new ways to drill, but we need to make it safer too. Same time, conservation has to be on the table. We ought to be I drive an American-made hybrid, I'm happy to say. We need to be making more fuel-efficient automobiles. We need to be pushing conservation in all sorts of fronts. We also need to be looking at alternative wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, biomass. All this needs to be on the table. While no one of those sources is going to solve our problems, together, a couple percent here, a couple percent there, the math is going to add up to fundamentally change things. But unfortunately, the way the media operates today, they'll grab the most irresponsible headline, or they'll only shout to drill, baby, drill, or they'll only shout to we need absolute regulations. And then the answer is usually somewhere in between. And if you have a 20-second soundbite on evening news, or you put something on a bumper sticker, that doesn't get to all the nuance and complexity of the issues. So we need a longer attention span by the public. We need more engagement. We need, I think, more responsible journalism that begins to flesh out the complexities of these issues. But clearly, this current anti-regulation is just gotten utterly out of control. You did not hear Ronald Reagan saying we don't need more infrastructure funding. You didn't hear Ronald Reagan saying we should gut all clean water. And Reagan was is held up today as the great father of modern American conservatism. But since when did building roads and bridges and sewage systems and power plants and cancer wings on a hospital and modernization for airports and putting broadband or wireless internet technology in middle schools, since when did all this become socialism? This isn't democratic. This isn't Republican. These are investments that are good for the country. They're Main Street America, right down the middle. There's no democratic way to fill in a pothole or Republican way to fill in a pothole. There's just a common sense way to fill it in. All these things constitute viable investments in our country. They're good for commerce. They're good for a number of things. They're also labor intensive. Eisenhower, for example, a Republican president, a good president, Eisenhower spent a larger percentage on infrastructure than any other president. Today, would he be a socialist? So I think this knee-jerk anti-regulation neglects the fact that, clean air, clean water, this is all part of our heritage as Americans. The land, we own the land. It's your land. It's my land. We're the owners of it. It's not Exxon's. It's not the president's. It's not Congress's. This sort of knee-jerk anti-regulation, it reminds me of sort of the sagebrush rebellion, which kicked up about 3 decades ago. This is not constructive, and that's coming from the right. On the other hand, the left needs to realize that you cannot overly regulate. You have to release the spirit of entrepreneurialism. We can't overly handicap our businesses through very high taxes, which undermines their ability to compete with cheaper outsourced or offshored business enterprises. Again, it's a mixture of both, and the answer is somewhere in between. But our brand of politics today, where if you and I don't agree on everything, we disagree on a lot of things, but you're not my enemy. And we're both Americans who simply have a disagreement. And as my political hero, yours I know is Ronald Reagan, mine's Harry Truman. And I think Reagan and Truman have something in common. They always did what they thought was best for the country. And they both had this view, the hell with the polls. And it was a great moment where Harry Truman was in 1948, he's up for election. He's desegregating, Executive Order 9981, desegregating the armed forces. As tip of the hat, he said to the great Tuskegee Airmen, the Japanese are the famous 442nd, the Japanese Americans, the Navajo code talkers, all these great folks that helped us win the war and came back and faced discrimination. Truman's pushing that. He's pushing Jewish immigration, and he's getting hammered. And his advisors lay out the polls, and they say, Mr. President, you cannot possibly push this kind of civil rights, pro-Israel type of programs and get elected. You got to carry the South. And Truman says, quote unquote, the hell with the polls. He says, how far would Moses have gone in Egypt if he had a pollster? Which I think is just a wonderful line. And I think both Truman and Reagan had that the hell with the polls kind of mentality. This is what's best for the country, and let things go as they may. And what's interesting is both of them were criticized for that seeming simplicity, which wasn't. But yet history has been kind to both presidents. You see Reagan anywhere from about 8 to 14 in the ranking polls. I think I saw him at 9 or 10 in the last one I looked at. Truman's up to anywhere from 5 to 8 ranking polls. So they've both been well above average, knocking on the top 10 or just slightly in the top 10 list. Whereas the people that perpetually read polls, I don't see them at the top of the list.
Well, Dr. Watson, I really want to thank you. And when we begin to think about these things, and that's why I say I want my politicians to be putting America first, because there's no question in my mind that if we put America first, we would have been putting Americans back to work. We would have built those bridges. We would have built those airports. We would have done the things that put us back to work. And the president, when he in his debate the other night, and I have a tell of the day, which you can subscribe on iTunes, which one of the tells I talk about that for in that I kept watching because I kept thinking the president was doing the rope-a-dope, the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope, but but there was no punches being swung. There was only one gladiator in the ring that day, and that was Governor Romney.
I agree.
And so that but in order for us to begin to, and that's what we need to have the discussion on, and that's why I said when it went down to 7.8, the discussion should be, how do we put Americans back to work? The president should have answered, and I'm not giving him advice for his campaign. He should have answered, not only is General Motors and Chrysler back to work, but General Motors right now is adding 1,500 new people to work in IT, and so on, and made those kinds of forays into his defense.
Right.
He was probably he was the worst prepared. That people go back and they try to drag up different presidential debates and show how bad they were, but Nixon, because he didn't wear makeup, but he was prepared. You always knew Nixon knew his facts and could counterpunch with you.
Yes, always.
And I'm not trying to say, people said there's other things on the president's mind and all that. Hey, I'm not going to be a psychologist. All I can tell you is what I witnessed as one American, and one of the 60 million Americans watching, was wondering why he couldn't promote his own program. And he shouldn't then go out and complain that the other guy took over the stage, took over the arena, and gave his point of view. It was unchallenged. And as a coach, you bring the guys into the locker room at halftime and say, what in the world? Have you lost your mind? But for the good of our country, we really need politicians who don't worry about the next election. Don't worry about if they're going to get reelected. We need politicians who are going to be true to the virtues that made America what it is today. One of the greatest countries in the world. There's none like us. And we got a lot of problems. We got a lot of race problems. We got a lot of sexist problems. We got all those kinds of issues. But I always tell people I am glad to be an American every day I wake up. To me, it's one of the things I do that I said, how good can it get? I woke up this morning on this side. There was no dirt. There was no darkness, and that I was alive, and I'm an American, and I have a chance for greatness every day that I live.
Right.
Well, Dr. Watson, and thank you very much, and also good luck at the presidential debate. That's on October 20th, isn't it?
October 22. The signs behind me.
22nd. 22nd, right? And those of you who are not familiar with Lynn University, you may want to look it up. And if you're not, Dr. Watson has a new book out. And Dr. Watson, would you tell them the name of the new book?
It's called Affairs of State. It's a 200-year look at the misbehavior in the White House and scandal in the White House, who did it and why, as a way of trying to get to understand the other side of all of our nation's presidents. It's a fun read. It's Roman and Littlefield, Affairs of State, just released 2 weeks ago, so it's still warm.
Well, for the viewers, I want to remind you that upcoming guests will be Mark Levin, who's called by Sean Hannity the Great One, Robert Robinson, who is the president of Young Americans for Freedom, and John Walters, former drug czar for the United States and presently chief operating officer at Hudson Institute. I want to thank you again, Dr. Watson, and thank you very much for being a guest.
Always a pleasure. Hope to see you again soon.